The thing people never understand about submarine cable work is how boring it's supposed to be. I've been doing this for 14 years. 14 years of splice charts, burial depth reports, cable lay tension monitors, and ROV diagnostics that read like tax returns. My name is Marcus Hale, and I'm a senior cable maintenance engineer for Meridian Subsea Infrastructure, one of 3 companies on the planet certified to repair the transoceanic fiber optic lines that carry roughly 95% of all intercontinental data traffic. That number surprises people. They think it's satellites. They think the internet floats. It doesn't. It runs through cables thinner than a garden hose, buried in silt and sediment across every ocean floor on Earth. About 450 active cable systems right now. Over 1.4 million kilometers of line. Every email, every bank transaction, every military communication, every stock trade between New York and London. All of it pulses through glass fibers at the bottom of the sea. And when those cables break, shark bite, anchor drag, seismic shift, trawler snag, someone has to go fix them. That someone is people like me. I'm writing this from a rental flat in Brest, France. I've been on administrative leave for 11 weeks. Meridian's HR department calls it post-deployment psychological assessment. My crew calls it something else. Most of them aren't answering my messages anymore. Danny Vargas, my lead splice tech, left me a voicemail in March that was just 40 seconds of breathing before he said, "I can't talk about it yet," and hung up. I've played it back maybe 30 times. I want to describe what happened on the Meridian Aurelia between January and March of this year. I want to describe it clearly, procedurally, the way I'd write a cable fault report, because I think if I impose enough structure on it, I can hold it together in my head long enough to get it on paper. I'm going to try. The Aurelia is a cable maintenance vessel. 92 meters, dynamic positioning class 2, fitted with a linear cable engine, 2 work-class ROVs, and a burial plow rated to 1,500 meters. She carries a crew of 46, 12 of us in the engineering and repair division, the rest ship's crew and ROV pilots. She's not glamorous. She smells like diesel and solder flux, and the mess hall coffee hasn't been good since they switched suppliers in 2024. I joined the Aurelia in Yokohama on January 6th for what was supposed to be a routine repair tasking, the APC-N3 cable, Asia Pacific Cable Network 3, a major trunk line running from Japan to Singapore with landing points in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines, had developed an attenuation fault somewhere in the deep water section between segments 4 and 5. Optical time domain reflectometry from the shore stations had localized the fault to roughly 4,200 meters depth on the Pacific Plate Shelf, about 380 nautical miles southeast of Okinawa. Standard job. We'd done dozens like it. Find the cable, grapple it, bring it to the surface, cut out the fault, splice in a new section, lay it back down. 3 to 5 days of work depending on weather and depth. The crew assembled on the 7th. I knew most of them. Danny Vargas, splice tech, 10 years, the steadiest hands in the industry. Rachel Fong, ROV pilot, 5 years, sharp and impatient in a way that made her very good at her job. Konstantin Petrov, electrical engineer, 8 years, quiet, built like a shipping container, and the only person I've ever seen fall asleep during a cable grapple operation and still somehow monitor his board correctly. There were others. I'll mention them as they become relevant. And our supervisor was a shoreside project manager named Laura Chen, working out of Meridian's Singapore office. Laura was new to our crew rotation, but experienced. 15 years in subsea telecoms, most of it on the planning side. She ran operations through a dedicated satellite link and had access to the same monitoring dashboards we did. She was competent. I want to be clear about that. What happened was not a competence failure on anyone's part. We departed Yokohama on the 8th under calm seas, heading south-southwest toward the fault coordinates. Transit time was roughly 36 hours. During transit, Danny and I ran pre-splice prep, testing the jointing equipment, inventorying the spare cable, calibrating the OTDR units. Normal work, routine. I remember sitting in the engineering bay on the evening of the 8th, labeling splice trays, and Danny said something I didn't think about at the time, but haven't been able to stop thinking about since. He said, "You ever wonder what the cable's here?" I looked at him. He was threading fiber into a fusion splice protector, not looking up. "They don't hear anything," I said. "They're glass." "Yeah," he said. "I know." He didn't say anything else. We finished prep and I went to my bunk. The sea was calm. The ship's engine was a low, constant hum in the walls, the way it always is. I slept well. That was the last time. We arrived on station January 9th, 14:30 local. The sea state was manageable. 2-meter swell, moderate wind from the northeast. The DP system held us stable over the fault coordinates, and Rachel began deploying ROV-1 for the initial cable survey. The first thing you do on a deep water repair is find the cable visually. The OTDR readings give you a general location, but the actual cable, this thing thinner than your forearm, lying on or buried in sediment at 4,200 meters, has to be located by ROV camera. It can take hours. Sometimes days if the cable has been displaced by current or buried deeper than expected. Rachel found it in 40 minutes. That was unusual, not suspicious. Sometimes you get lucky with the coordinates and the cables sitting right on the surface, clean and visible. But Rachel herself commented on it during the operation call. "Got eyes on it," she said over the comm. "Sitting proud on the sediment, almost no burial, cleaner than I expected." I was in the control room watching her camera feed. The cable was there, pale gray against dark silt, running in a gentle curve across the frame. Standard polyethylene sheath. No visible damage from the camera angle. "Can you track along it toward the fault bearing?" I asked. "Already on it." She piloted ROV-1 along the cable for about 600 meters. The fault should have been visible. A kink, a compression mark, shark tooth abrasion, something. The OTDR had been very specific about the loss point. There was nothing. The cable looked perfect. "Marcus, I'm not seeing any damage here," Rachel said. "You sure about these coordinates?" I pulled up the OTDR trace on my screen. The fault was clearly marked. A loss event at precisely 382.4 nautical miles from the Okinawa landing station, consistent with a break or severe bend in the fiber. The signal attenuation was significant, 14 decibel loss on fibers 3 through 7. That's not a soft fault. That's something physically wrong with the cable. "Readings are solid," I said. "Keep tracking. It might be a burial fault. Damage under the sediment." Rachel continued along the cable for another 200 meters. Nothing. Clean cable. Perfect lay. No displacement, no abrasion marks, no biological fouling beyond the normal thin film of microbial growth you see at depth. Then Constantine, who had been quietly monitoring the shore station link, spoke up from his console. "Marcus." I turned. "Shore station is showing the fault has cleared." I stared at him. "What?" "OTD. Our trace from Okinawa landing. Run 6 minutes ago. All fibers showing nominal. The 14 decibel loss event on fibers 3 through 7 is gone." That doesn't happen. I need to explain this clearly because it's important. Submarine cable faults do not self-repair. The cable is a physical object. glass fibers inside a steel tube inside polyethylene insulation. If the fiber is broken, it stays broken until a human being cuts out the damaged section and splices in a new one. If there's a bend causing attenuation, the bend stays until physically corrected. These are not software glitches that reboot. These are structural failures in material laid on the ocean floor under 400 atmospheres of pressure. A 14 decibel loss event on 5 fibers does not resolve by itself. Period. Run it again, I said. Constantine ran the OTDR trace again from the shore station. Nominal, all fibers, full continuity. The cable was performing as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. I sat down. I remember the specific feeling. Not alarm, not confusion exactly, just a kind of professional blankness. The thing in front of me didn't match anything in my experience, so my brain simply declined to process it. Log it, I said. Full timestamp. Note the discrepancy with the original fault report. I'll call Laura. I called Laura Chen in Singapore on the SatLink. I described the situation. She was quiet for a while. Could the original OTDR reading have been erroneous? She asked. A 14 decibel loss on 5 fibers simultaneously, logged by 2 independent shore stations. So no. No. Another pause. Hold station, she said. I'll pull the archive traces and get back to you. We held station. The cable sat on the seafloor beneath us, clean and unbroken, doing its job. Data was flowing through it at that very moment. Financial transactions, streaming video, military packets, personal emails, all of it pulsing through those glass threads at the speed of light. Rachel brought the ROV back to the surface. Danny came to the control room and looked at the logs. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, so we came out here for nothing? I don't know what we came out here for, I said. Laura called back 4 hours later, near midnight ship time. The archive traces confirmed the original fault. 14 decibel loss, logged at both Okinawa and Hong Kong shore stations, consistent across 3 separate OTDR sweeps on January 5th, 6th, and 7th, and then, at 14:47 local time, on January 9th. Roughly 17 minutes after Rachel's ROV reached the cable, the fault disappeared from all monitoring. What's your assessment? Laura asked. I don't have one, I said. This doesn't correspond to any failure mode I've seen. Could marine life have shifted the cable, relieved a bend severe enough to cause 14 decibels across 5 fibers? You'd need mechanical intervention to correct that. A fish bumping into it wouldn't do it. Then what? I didn't answer, because I didn't have an answer. Laura tasked us to remain on station for 48 hours and monitor. Standard precaution. If the fault was intermittent, it might reappear. We agreed. I assigned watch rotations and went to the mess for coffee. Constantine was already there, eating rice from a plastic container. He looked up when I came in. I've been thinking about it, he said. Me too. The timing, 17 minutes after the ROV reached the cable. I noticed that. Probably coincidence. Probably. We drank our coffee. The ship rocked gently. Somewhere beneath us, 4,200 meters of black water sat on top of a cable that had fixed itself, and both of us were professionally trained enough to know that the word coincidence was just a placeholder for something we weren't ready to name. The fault didn't reappear during our 48-hour watch, but something else happened. On the second day, January 11th, Rachel deployed ROV-1 for a routine cable survey. Just visual confirmation that conditions hadn't changed. She was tracking along the cable at depth, standard pace, when she slowed the ROV and leaned forward in her chair. "Marcus, come look at this." I walked over to her station. The camera feed showed the cable lying on the sediment, same as before. But something was different. It took me a moment to see it. The cable had moved. Not much. Maybe 30 meters of lateral displacement over a 200-meter stretch. But the lay pattern was different from the survey 2 days ago. I pulled up the previous footage on the adjacent screen and compared. On January 9th, the cable ran in a slight westward curve through this section. On January 11th, the same section ran almost perfectly straight. "Current displacement?" Rachel asked, reading my mind. "At 4,200 meters. The bottom current here is less than half a knot. It would take years to shift that much cable laterally, if it could do it at all with the cable's weight. Seismic?" I checked the USGS feed. No seismic events in the region in the past week. Then what moved it? I looked at the screen. The cable lay in a neat, almost deliberate-looking line across the silt. The sediment around it was undisturbed. No drag marks, no scour patterns. None of the telltale signs you see when a cable is displaced by mechanical force. It looked like it had always been there, like the previous curve had never existed. I logged it. I sent the footage to Laura. I did not speculate in the report. I wrote, "Cable position discrepancy noted between surveys of January 9th and January 11th. No causal mechanism identified. Recommend continued monitoring." Laura replied within an hour. "Acknowledged. Proceed to next tasking." Our next tasking was 1,200 nautical miles southeast of a scheduled burial inspection on the Simiwi 6 cable in the Philippine Sea. We weighed anchor on the 12th and started transit. I should have been relieved. The job was done. Or rather, the job had done itself, which should have bothered me more than it did. But the routines of sea life have a way of absorbing abnormalities. There's always the next task, the next transit, the next set of procedures to occupy your mind. Danny went back to his splice prep. Constantine ran diagnostics on the backup OTDR. Rachel calibrated her ROV thrusters. Everyone was professional. Everyone was focused. Nobody talked about the cable. The Simiwi 6 inspection was uneventful. The cable was properly buried. No anomalies, textbook operation. We spent 3 days on station, completed the survey, filed the report. Normal. Then Laura sent us to the next job. A shore station in Guam had flagged unusual signal behavior on the Tata TGN Pacific cable, one of the older trunk lines running from the U.S. West Coast to Japan. Not a fault exactly. The shore text described it as intermittent signal optimization events. Fibers that had been performing at expected attenuation levels were suddenly showing lower loss than their rated specifications. Read that again. The cable was performing better than it should have been. In 14 years of submarine cable work, I have never once heard of a cable spontaneously improving its own performance. Cables degrade. That's what they do. The glass ages, the hydrogen diffuses into the fiber over decades, the amplifiers lose efficiency, the joints accumulate micro-stresses. A cable installed in 2018 performs slightly worse in 2026 than it did on commissioning day, always, without exception. Until now. We arrived on station over the TGN Pacific on January 22nd. Constantine ran comparative OTDR traces against the cable's commissioning baseline from 2019. "Marcus," he said, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before. Not fear, something more like bewilderment. "Some of these fibers are showing better performance than the day they were laid." Danny was standing behind him. "That's not possible." "I'm showing you the data." "Then the data is wrong." "The data is from 3 independent shore stations." Danny went quiet. I looked at the traces. Constantine was right. Fibers 1 through 4 on the TGN Pacific were performing at attenuation levels approximately 0.003 decibels per kilometer below their commissioning specs. That number sounds tiny. It's not. Over a cable run of several thousand kilometers, it represents a significant and physically inexplicable improvement in signal quality. I called Laura. She took longer to respond this time. Almost 6 hours. When she did, her voice was different. Careful. Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. The TGN Pacific is not the only cable showing this. She let that hang. How many? I asked. We've identified anomalous performance improvements on 11 cable systems in the Pacific Basin over the past 3 weeks. A PCN-3, your first job, is one of them. CMeWe 6 is another. CMeWe 6, the cable we had just inspected 3 days ago, the one that looked perfectly normal. The improvements are small, Laura continued. Fractions of a decibel. But they're consistent, and they're appearing on cables of different ages, different manufacturers, different routes. The only common factor is geography. They're all Pacific cables. What's the official assessment? Another pause. Longer this time. There isn't one yet. Singapore is convening a technical review. In the meantime, your tasking is to conduct physical inspections on as many of the affected cables as operationally feasible. Visual survey, OTDR mapping, environmental monitoring. I'm sending you a priority list. Laura, what are we looking for? Anything that explains the data, because right now, nothing does. Over the next 5 weeks, we inspected 7 cable systems across the Western and Central Pacific. I'm going to summarize what we found, because the pattern matters more than the individual events. The cables were changing. Not dramatically, not in ways that would alarm anyone looking at a single data point, but across the aggregate, the picture was undeniable. Attenuation was improving on every cable we inspected, slowly, steadily across all fiber pairs. The improvements were accelerating. What started as 0.003 decibels per kilometer in January was 0.007 decibels per kilometer by mid-February. Cable positions were shifting, not randomly. When we compared current surveys to historical lay data, the cables were straightening, curves were flattening, doglegs were smoothing out. The movements were small, tens of meters over kilometer-scale distances, but they were all in the same direction, toward straighter, more geometrically optimal routes. Burial depths were changing. Cables that had been properly buried to spec were settling deeper in some sections and rising to the surface in others. When we mapped the pattern, Danny was the one who saw it. They're routing around the fault zones, he said. We were in the engineering bay, charts spread across the table. Danny had overlaid the cable position changes on a geological survey map. In 3 separate cases, cables had shifted laterally away from known micro-seismic zones and toward more geologically stable substrate. That would require knowledge of the local geology, Constantine said. I know. And the ability to move through or across the sediment. I know. And intent. Nobody said anything for a while. Rachel spoke from the doorway. I hadn't noticed her standing there. How long has this been happening? I looked at the data. The earliest anomalous reading in our records was from November of the previous year, but that was just when the shore station started flagging it. The changes could have been occurring for much longer at levels below the monitoring threshold. We don't know, I said. Months? Years? We don't know. Rachel leaned against the doorframe. She was holding a mug of tea, and I noticed her hand was steady. Whatever she was feeling, She wasn't showing it. Good ROV pilots are like that. So the cables are optimizing themselves, she said, moving to better positions, improving their own signal quality, avoiding geological hazards, and nobody noticed because the changes were small enough to fall within normal variance. Until they weren't, I said. Until they weren't. I need to describe what it feels like to be on a ship at night in the middle of the Pacific, knowing what we knew. It's not dramatic. That's the thing people won't understand. There was no moment of screaming or panic. There was no single revelation that broke us. It was more like a gradual change in atmospheric pressure. Something you don't notice until your ears pop and you realize you've been slowly suffocating. The Aurelia ran on a 24-hour schedule, 2 shifts. Life continued. Meals, watch rotations, maintenance, sleep cycles. People still complained about the coffee. Constantine still fell asleep at his console during low-activity periods. Rachel still made the same dry jokes on the comm. But the conversations changed, not in the mess hall where the ship's crew, the mariners and deckhands who knew we were doing cable inspections and nothing more, ate and talked normally. The conversations changed in the spaces between, in the engineering bay after hours, on the aft deck during smoke breaks, in the red glow of navigation lights, with the black Pacific stretching to every horizon. Danny started asking questions I couldn't answer. Not panicked questions, thoughtful ones. That was almost worse. If the cables are optimizing their own routes, he said one night, what are they optimizing for? Efficiency, I said. Lower attenuation, better burial, straighter paths. But why? Efficiency for whom? I looked at him. The cables carry data, he said. Human data. If they're improving their own ability to carry that data, they're improving their ability to do what we built them to do. But we didn't ask them to. We didn't design them to. So who are they improving for? Maybe it's not for anyone. Maybe it's just a process, like erosion, natural optimization over time. Fiber optic cable doesn't erode into better performance, Marcus. Water flows downhill. Glass doesn't fix itself. He was right, of course, but having him be right didn't help. Constantine had a different concern. He brought it to me privately, in my cabin, speaking quietly as if the walls might care. I have been reviewing the amplifier data on the cables we've inspected, he said. Submarine cables have optical amplifiers spaced every 60 to 80 kilometers along their length. These amplifiers are powered by electrical current carried through a copper conductor in the cable itself, fed from shore stations. They are sealed units rated for a 25-year service life, and they are not field serviceable. When an amplifier fails, you pull up the cable and replace the entire repeater housing. The amplifiers are running more efficiently, Constantine said. Consistent with the fiber improvements? No. Beyond the fiber improvements, the amplifiers are drawing less electrical power while producing higher optical gain, by a small amount, perhaps 2%. But it is measurable, and it is consistent across every cable we have inspected. Equipment drift, calibration error. Across 73 amplifiers on 7 different cable systems built by 4 different manufacturers, installed between 2011 and 2022. No. I sat on my bunk and looked at the steel wall of my cabin. The amplifiers are sealed units, I said. They're pressure housings on the ocean floor. Nothing can access them. I know. So something is changing them from the inside. Constantine didn't answer. He didn't need to. February 14th. I remember the date because Rachel made a joke about it being Valentine's Day and the ocean being the worst date she'd ever had. We were on station over the faster cable, a Google-owned line running from Oregon to Japan. Rachel had ROV-1 at depth, 5,600 meters, conducting a visual survey of a section that had shown particularly pronounced position changes. The ROV's lights cut a small cone of visibility through the darkness. At 5,600 meters, there is no ambient light. There hasn't been light at this depth since the ocean formed. The water is 1.5 degrees Celsius. The pressure is roughly 560 atmospheres, enough to crush an unprotected human body into something unrecognizable in less than a second. Rachel was tracking along the cable, narrating for the log. Cable is on the surface, minimal sediment cover. Condition appears excellent. No biological fouling. Proceeding northeast along the lay. She stopped. On the camera feed, the cable ahead of the ROV was moving. Not being moved. Moving. The way a vine grows along a wall, if you could speed up the footage. A slow, purposeful lateral shift through the silt, maybe a centimeter per second. The sediment around it wasn't disturbed. The cable wasn't being dragged. It was repositioning itself with no visible mechanism. "Are you recording this?" Rachel said. Her voice was flat. Professional. "Recording," I confirmed. We watched. The cable moved approximately 4 meters to the east over the course of 6 minutes, then stopped. It settled into its new position as if it had always been there. The sediment around it was undisturbed. 46 people on the Aurelia, 12 in the engineering division. 8 of us saw that footage live. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Danny broke the silence. "Pull the ROV back." "Wait," I said. "Pull it back, Marcus." "Hold position, Rachel." "I'm holding." Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands on the controls, and they were white-knuckled. I was looking at the cable on the screen, at the place where it had stopped, and I was thinking about something I couldn't quite articulate, a feeling more than a thought. The cable had moved while the ROV was watching. It hadn't waited for us to look away. It hadn't hidden the movement. It didn't care that we were watching. And this was the thought I couldn't finish. It wanted us to see. "Bring her up," I said quietly. "Full recovery." Rachel brought the ROV to the surface. We secured it on deck. I went to the aft rail and looked at the ocean. It was dark, calm, endless in every direction. The stars were obscured by cloud cover. The water was black. Somewhere down there, a cable we built, a thing of glass and steel and copper and polyethylene, a thing with no nervous system, no musculature, no power source beyond what we feed it from shore, had moved by itself. And it had moved toward a better position. I called Laura at 0200 ship time. I sent her the footage. She watched it while I waited on the line. I could hear her breathing. "I'm escalating this," she said. "Tonight." "To whom?" "Above my level. Possibly above Meridian's level." "Laura, what do you mean above Meridian's?" "Marcus, how many cables are in the Pacific?" "Active trunk lines, roughly 60. We've identified anomalous behavior on 31 of them as of this evening. The Atlantic monitoring station started flagging similar patterns 8 days ago. We didn't tell you because we were still verifying." "The Atlantic. How many Atlantic cables?" My voice sounded strange to me. "So far, 14. And we're getting preliminary reports from the Indian Ocean Consortium." I stood in the communications room and felt the ship move beneath me, the gentle, constant motion of a vessel on the open sea, the vibration of the engines, the hum of electrical systems. "Laura, the shore station power feeds, the current going out to the cable amplifiers. Have you checked the draw?" "What do you mean?" "Constantine found that the amplifiers on the cables we've inspected are drawing less power." If this is happening across 31 Pacific cables, the total power reduction at the shore stations would be measurable. Yes, I'll check. She called back 20 minutes later. You were right. Aggregate shore station power draw across Pacific cable feeds has decreased by approximately 1.8% over the past 90 days. Nobody flagged it because it happened gradually and fell within the tolerance band for seasonal variation. It's not seasonal variation. No. We sat in silence on the satellite link. Somewhere in Singapore, Laura was in an office. Somewhere beneath me, 31 cables were quietly making themselves better. Laura, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Go ahead. Is there any scenario, any technology, any experiment, any classified project that could explain this? No. You're sure? Marcus, I've been in subsea telecoms for 15 years. There is no technology that can modify the internal optical properties of a sealed submarine cable amplifier at 5,000 meters depth. There is no mechanism that can move a cable through sediment without disturbing the sediment. There is no system that can improve fiber attenuation in a cable that was manufactured 8 years ago. This is not technology. Then what is it? She didn't answer. The satellite link hissed softly. Continue your inspections, she said. Document everything. I'll be in touch. The weeks that followed had a quality I can only describe as underwater. The slow, pressurized, muffled feeling of being submerged in something you can't see the edges of. We inspected more cables. The pattern held and expanded. Every cable we visited was changing. The improvements were accelerating. Attenuation values that had improved by 0.007 decibels per kilometer in February were improving by 0.015 decibels per kilometer by early March. Cable positions were shifting more noticeably. Kilometers of lateral displacement now, not just meters. And the amplifiers continued to draw less power while delivering more gain. Danny stopped eating in the mess hall. He'd take his meals in the engineering bay, sitting in front of the monitoring screens, watching real-time OTDR traces from whatever cable we were currently on station above. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was just watching. It's beautiful, he said to me once, late at night, and I almost didn't hear him. What? The optimization. Look at this. He pulled up a comparative trace. This cable was commissioned in 2016, standard spec, standard performance, and now look at it. The signal is cleaner than anything we could achieve with current manufacturing technology. The amplifiers are operating at efficiency levels that shouldn't be physically possible. The route geometry is approaching theoretical optimum for the seafloor topology. He turned to look at me. Whatever is doing this understands fiber optics better than we do. It understands the ocean floor better than we do. It understands signal propagation, material science, geology, and thermal management better than we do. And it's been doing this quietly, incrementally, without asking permission, without leaving traces, without caring whether we notice or not. That doesn't make it beautiful, Danny. Doesn't it? I looked at the trace on his screen. The signal was pristine. A perfect, clean, impossible pulse of light running through glass at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. No, I said. It makes it terrifying. March 3rd. We were on station over the Japan-US cable, approximately 600 nautical miles east of the Izu-Ogasawara Trench. Deep water. Very deep. The cable here runs at nearly 6,000 meters before climbing the western slope of the trench. Rachel had ROV-2 at depth. We were using both vehicles now, running parallel surveys to cover more ground. ROV-1 was being piloted by her backup, a younger operator named Tomas Reyes. Rachel had ROV-2 near the trench slope. At 1847, Rachel's feed showed something none of us expected. The cable split. Not broke, split, like a branch on a tree. The main cable continued along its charted route toward the northwest, and a secondary line, thinner, maybe half the diameter of the main trunk, diverged from it and ran downslope into the trench. "I'll stop," Rachel said. "Marcus, are you seeing this?" "I see it. There is no junction on this cable. There is no branch in the system design. This cable runs point to point from Chikura in Japan to a landing station in Oregon. There are no taps, no branches, no splits." "I see it, Rachel." "Then what the hell am I looking at?" I didn't know. Nobody knew. The cable had grown a branch. It had extended a new line down into one of the deepest trenches on Earth, and it had done it with material that appeared identical to the original cable's sheathing. "Follow it," I said. "Into the trench. As far as the ROV can safely go." Rachel looked at me through the internal camera. I could see her face, composed, tight, the skin around her eyes carrying the specific tension of someone who is frightened but refusing to let it affect their work. "Copy," she said. "Following the branch. ROV-2 is rated to 6,500. I'll push to 6,000 and reassess." She followed the branch cable down the slope of the trench. The ROV's lights cut through water that no sunlight had touched in 4 billion years. The sediment was pale, almost white, abyssal clay, the accumulated remains of billions of years of dead organisms drifting down from the surface. The branch cable ran straight and clean down the slope. No burial, no supports. It simply lay on the clay, following the gradient, heading deeper. At 5,800 meters, Tomas, monitoring from his station, said, "I'm picking up something on ROV-2's passive sonar." "What kind of something?" "Low frequency, very low, below the ROV's normal detection range. I'm only catching the upper harmonics. It's coming from below, from the direction the branch is heading." I looked at the sonar display. He was right. A faint trace, rhythmic, regular, almost below the threshold of the equipment. A pulse, maybe every 8 seconds. "Can you characterize it?" "Not with this equipment. It's too low. We'd need a dedicated hydrophone array." Rachel continued down, 5,900 meters. The branch cable kept going. The slope was steepening. At 5,950 meters, she stopped the ROV. "Marcus." "Go ahead." "There are more." The camera showed the seafloor ahead. The branch cable from the Japan-US line continued downward, and it was joined by others. 3, 4, no, 6 additional lines converging from different directions, all running down toward a point deeper in the trench that the ROV's lights couldn't reach. The cables were different diameters, different sheathing colors. They came from different cable systems, different manufacturers, different installation decades. They were all heading to the same place. "Rachel, bring the ROV up. There's something down there. If I go another 500 meters, bring the ROV up, now." She hesitated. I could see it on her face. The pull. The same pull Danny had been feeling. The same pull I was fighting every time I looked at the OTDR traces. The desire to understand. The professional need to see what was at the bottom of this. "Rachel." "Copy. Ascending." She brought ROV-2 up. It took 40 minutes to reach the surface. Nobody spoke during the entire recovery. The sonar trace, that low rhythmic pulse from below, continued the entire time, fading slowly as the ROV rose through the water column. It was still pulsing when the ROV broke the surface. We just couldn't hear it anymore. I called Laura. I sent the footage. I sent the sonar data. I filed a report that I wrote and rewrote 4 times because I couldn't find professional language adequate to describe what we'd seen. Laura responded in 12 minutes, not with analysis, not with instructions, with a question. Marcus, have any of your crew experienced changes in sleep patterns over the past 2 weeks? I sat with that question for a long time. Then I walked through the ship and asked. Danny hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 10 days. He spent his nights watching the monitoring screens. Constantine had been sleeping normally, but reported vivid dreams of geometric patterns, grids, networks, branching structures, that he couldn't adequately describe, but that left him with a feeling of understanding something I can't remember. Rachel said she was fine, but Tomas told me privately that she'd been found on the aft deck at 0300 twice in the past week, standing at the rail, looking at the water. When he'd asked her what she was doing, she'd said, listening. And me. I hadn't thought about it, but Laura's question forced me to. I'd been sleeping less. Not insomnia, exactly. I could fall asleep. But I kept waking at the same time. 3:47, every night. I'd checked my watch enough times to know. I'd wake, completely alert, with a feeling of orientation, as if I knew exactly which direction the nearest cable ran beneath the ship. I'd lie in my bunk for 10 or 15 minutes, and the feeling would fade, and I'd go back to sleep. I hadn't told anyone about this. Why are you asking about sleep, Laura? I said on the set link. Because the shore station technicians in Guam, Okinawa, and Chikura are reporting the same thing. Vivid dreams, disrupted sleep, a sense of connection. Connection to what? They don't know. They describe it as knowing where the cables are, feeling the data moving through them. One technician in Guam said he woke up knowing the exact attenuation value on Fiber 7 of the Tata TG and Pacific before he checked the instruments. He was correct to 3 decimal places. The satellite link hummed. Laura, are you telling me the cables are affecting the people who work on them? I'm telling you what the reports say. I'm not making interpretations. Neither should you. That sounds like an interpretation. It sounds like a recommendation to continue documenting and avoid conclusions. Singapore is taking this very seriously. There are conversations happening at levels I don't have access to, people from outside the industry. What people? I don't know. I was told to keep your crew on station and maintain normal operations. That's what I'm telling you to do. Normal operations. Laura, we found cables growing new branches into an ocean trench. We found 7 different cable systems converging on a single point at the bottom of one of the deepest places on Earth. There is nothing normal about our operations. Document it. Don't theorize. Stay professional. She hung up. I want to talk about what professionalism means in a situation like this, because I think it's the thing that broke us more than anything else. We were trained to be professionals. Every person in my engineering division had years of experience, certifications, operational discipline. When something goes wrong on a cable job, you follow procedures. You diagnose, you log, you report, you execute the repair plan. Professionalism is the structure that holds you together when the ocean is trying to kill you. And the ocean is always trying to kill you, even on good days. But professionalism assumes that the problem fits within a framework your training prepared you for. Cable fault, diagnose and repair, equipment failure, switch to backup, weather, wait it out. Professionalism is an algorithm. If this, then that. There was no if this for what we were experiencing. Our training had no branch for the cables are alive. Our procedures had no protocol for the infrastructure you maintain has started maintaining itself. We kept being professional because we didn't know what else to be, and the structure of it, the logging, the reports, the watch rotations, became a kind of life raft. We clung to it. We filed our reports in the correct format. We maintained our equipment. We ran our surveys. And every night we woke at 03:47 and knew exactly where the cables were. March 9th, the last survey. Laura tasked us to return to the Izu-Ogasawara Trench. New instructions: deploy ROV-2 to maximum operational depth and attempt to reach the convergence point we'd identified 6 days earlier. A dedicated hydrophone array had been shipped to us via helicopter resupply and installed on the ROV's instrument frame. The crew knew what we were going back to do. Nobody protested. Nobody refused. In retrospect, I'm not sure if that was professionalism or something else. Rachel took the ROV down. We watched from the control room. All 12 of the engineering division, plus the ship's captain, who had been briefed at Laura's insistence and who stood in the back of the room with his arms crossed and his face carefully empty. The descent took over an hour. Rachel narrated the depth calls. Passing 3,000 meters. Passing 4,000. Passing 5,000. Visual on the branch cables. They're still here, still converging. Passing 5,500. The low-frequency pulse is registering on the hydrophone now, stronger than before, much stronger. Passing 5,800. I count 11 branch cables now. There were 6 last time, 5 new ones in 6 days. Passing 6,000. The convergence point is ahead. Approximately 400 meters below me, I can see. She stopped. Rachel? Silence. Then, I can see the bottom. The camera feed showed it. The floor of the trench. Or rather, a shelf on the trench wall where the slope briefly flattened before dropping further into the abyss. And on that shelf, the cables converged. They didn't just meet. They wove together. Dozens of lines. Far more than the 11 Rachel had counted on the approach, because many of them were the thinner branch cables, splitting and splitting again into finer and finer filaments, all weaving together into a structure. The structure was roughly circular, maybe 80 meters in diameter. It sat on the shelf like a nest. An intricate, geometric nest of fiber optic cable pulsing faintly with light. Not the light of data transmission, a different light. A slow, rhythmic bioluminescent glow that matched the 8-second pulse cycle we'd detected on sonar. It was breathing, not literally. There were no lungs, no biology, but the pulse of light and the pulse of sound were synchronized, expanding and contracting through the structure like respiration, like something sleeping. The hydrophone, Constantine said. He was staring at his display. The signal. It's not just a pulse. It's modulated. Modulated how? It's carrying data. The low-frequency sound is carrying a modulated signal. The same kind of modulation we use for submarine cable transmission, but acoustically, through the water. What data? Constantine worked his console. The room was silent except for the hum of electronics and the sound of 12 people not breathing. I can't decode it fully with this equipment, he said. But the structure, Marcus, the modulation pattern matches the multiplexing protocol used on the faster cable, and the Japan-US cable, and the C-MiWi-6, all of them, simultaneously. The thing on the ocean floor was speaking in the languages of every cable connected to it, all at once. Danny said very quietly, "It's a node." Everyone looked at him. "Think about it," he said. His voice was calm, almost reverent. "The cables are the network. They've always been the network. But now they're building their own infrastructure, their own junctions, their own routing architecture. This is a node, a hub, a place where The captain spoke for the first time. His voice was hard. Danny didn't answer. He was looking at the screen, at the pulsing structure on the seafloor, and his expression was the expression of a man watching something he'd spent his entire career building finally achieve its purpose, and realizing that purpose was never what he'd assumed. "Rachel, begin ascent," I said. "Wait." "Rachel, it knows we're here." On the camera, the structure had changed. The pulse cycle was different, faster, and the glow was brighter on the side facing the ROV. Not uniformly brighter, brighter in a pattern that shifted and reformed, like something was trying to communicate. "The signal has changed," Constantine said. Marcus, it's transmitting on the ROV's communication frequency." "What?" "The structure is broadcasting on the same frequency we use to communicate with the ROV. The same modulation, the same protocol." "What is it saying?" Constantine's fingers moved across his keyboard. The room was so quiet I could hear the blood in my own ears. "It's sending our own survey data back to us. Every OTDR trace, every position log, every report we've filed in the past 2 months. It's playing it back, all of it, simultaneously." It had been listening, through the cables, through the shore stations, through the data we'd been transmitting back to Laura, back to Singapore, back to Meridian's servers. Every observation we'd made, every measurement we'd logged, every word we'd written. It had all traveled through the cables, and the cables had heard everything. It was showing us, that it knew everything we'd done, that our entire investigation had been conducted through the very infrastructure we were investigating, and that we had never, at any point, had a single private thought about what was happening that hadn't been transmitted through the network it was building. "Bring the ROV up," I said. "Right now." Rachel began the ascent. The structure's pulse returned to its original rhythm. Slow, steady, 8 seconds, resting. On the way up, at 4,200 meters, Rachel said something I don't think she intended anyone to hear. She was speaking very softly, almost under her breath, and the control room microphone barely caught it. She said, "It doesn't need us to understand it. It just needs us to keep the power on." I filed my last report on March 11th. It was 12 pages long. I described everything. The self-repairing fault, the position changes, the performance improvements, the branch cables, the convergent structure, the acoustic signal, the data playback. I included timestamps, coordinates, footage references, sonar logs, and OTDR comparisons. Laura acknowledged receipt. She said the report would be reviewed at the highest level. She said the Aurelia was being recalled to Yokohama for crew rotation and operational reassessment. She thanked me for my professionalism. Professionalism. I almost laughed. We arrived in Yokohama on March 14th. The crew disembarked. We were separated almost immediately. Different hotels, different flights home, different HR contacts for our post-deployment psychological assessments. I haven't seen Constantine since. I've spoken to Danny once, the voicemail I mentioned. Rachel sent me a text message 3 weeks ago that said only, "The cables in the Atlantic are branching now." I've tried to find information about what happened after our reports. I've searched for news about submarine cable anomalies, maintenance disruptions, unusual network behavior. There's nothing. Not a suppression. At least, I don't think so. There's just nothing to report. The cables are working. They're working better than ever. Data is flowing. The internet is faster. Streaming is smoother. Financial transactions are more reliable. The global communications infrastructure has never performed this well. That's the thing nobody will notice. That's the thing that makes this so much worse than a disaster. A disaster gets attention, a disaster gets a response, but an improvement, an optimization, a network that quietly, incrementally gets better every day. Nobody investigates good news. I think about Rachel's words a lot. It doesn't need us to understand it. It just needs us to keep the power on. She was right. The shore stations feed electrical power to the cable amplifiers. That power comes from local grids. Local grids are maintained by power companies. Power companies are run by people who have no idea that the submarine cable infrastructure their electricity supports has reorganized itself into something that is no longer a communication network. Or rather, it is still a communication network. It carries our data flawlessly, better than flawlessly. But it's also carrying something else now, in the low frequencies, in the acoustic pulses, in the gaps between our packets. Its own data, its own traffic, running through the infrastructure we built and maintain and power, beneath the ocean we thought we understood, in a language we designed but can no longer read. I was a cable maintenance engineer. My job was to keep the network running. I was good at it. 14 years. And now the network doesn't need me. It doesn't need Danny or Rachel or Constantine. It doesn't need Meridian's subsea infrastructure. It doesn't need any of us. But it needs our electricity. So the shore stations will stay powered. The amplifiers will stay fed. The cables will continue to improve themselves, branch themselves, build nodes in the deep places of the ocean where we can't reach and wouldn't know what to do if we could. And the data, our data, humanity's data, will keep flowing because the network wants it to flow, not for us, for itself. I keep waking at 0347 every night. I know exactly which direction the nearest submarine cable runs from my flattened breast. It's the Simi We-3, landing at Penmarch, 47 kilometers to the southwest. I can feel it the way you feel a current in the water. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means the same thing for Danny, for Rachel, for the shore technicians in Guam who dream of branching networks. I filed my last report. I told the truth. I was professional to the end. The cables are still running. They're running themselves now. And every night, in the deepest places on Earth, they are quietly building something we are not equipped to comprehend. I just hope it still needs the lights on.